Hello, greetings of peace. This video, in this video, I'm going to talk about the transatlantic slave trade. So pretty much, what is the transatlantic slave trade? Pretty much, it's the slave trade that involves the European powers and the Americas, North, South, and Central America. What can I say about this? Number one, well, I'm here in the United States, so how can I say? A lot of people don't know this, but majority of slaves actually went to South America. The second stop was the Caribbeans, and then in third place was North America. So there were more slaves being sold in South America and the Caribbeans. So pretty much, there's actually a higher percentage of people who are of African descent in Central and South America than in North America, but most North Americans don't know this fact. And then the thing is this, with those other countries in Central and South America, they are amalgamated, meaning up here in the United States, it was heavily segregated, meaning the people of European descent did not typically intermingle or mix with the people of African descent or indigenous descent. In the Central and South America, that was different. Those people were able to amalgamate and then become a new identity and form as one. Actually, that's what's happening right now in the United States as we speak. A lot of, how can I say, the demographics are changing here in the United States. Pretty much, if you want to see the future in terms of like what the United States is going to be, kind of like you can already see with the other countries in the Americas. You know what I'm saying? That's pretty much where this is going in terms of demographic and phenotype. If you don't know what phenotype is expression of your genes, meaning your outward appearance. So that's what phenotype means. So what can I say about the transatlantic slave trade? Because of how can I say? So in these countries, in these Central and South American countries, a lot of the people who come from those countries, if you were to infer that they have African heritage or they may be of African descent, many of them get offended. And it's not their fault. It's just the way they were educated. You know what I'm saying? Because they come up under a colonial system. So they don't really know these facts, or some of them do and accept it, but a lot of them, it makes a lot of them uncomfortable. And I live in a city where a lot of people who come from these countries, we've had conversations, and sometimes it would end up in conflict, or it would leave a bad taste in their mouth. Sometimes it would get physically violent. How can I say? So yes, most of the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade, if you really wanted to study and learn about it, you need to, you would have to study the countries of the Central America and the Caribbean lines in South America, and most of it is in Spanish. Most of the history of the transatlantic slave trade is in Spanish or in Portuguese, So that's really the legacy of slavery in this entire Western Hemisphere. Now, a lot of these people, coming from these countries, you can tell that they're not, how can I say, some of them may look as I do, somebody who's clearly of African descent. Some of them, you might describe them as being mulatto, or, there's another term called mestizo. That's something completely different. I won't get into that. But, how can I say, okay. So a lot of the people from these countries do not consider themselves of African descent. However, if you look on YouTube and everything, there's a lot of people from these countries getting DNA tests. And oftentimes you're seeing 20, 30, 40, 50% sub-Saharan African. And it's a shock to many of these people, because some of them will get these results, but they're fair skinned with fairly straight hair and features, et cetera, et cetera. But if you know the history of the transatlantic slave trade, then it would make sense. You know what I'm saying? It wouldn't be a shocker to you. In regards to how people from other countries identify themselves now, sometimes, there are people of African descent who are from the United States who try to communicate these facts to these folks from other countries, and and it doesn't go over well because they feel like to identify with being of African descent is like denigrating their culture, or you're trying to like take away their identity. You know what I'm saying? How can I put it? In a sense, I understand where they're coming from because they have their own unique history, their own unique culture, and their own unique language, and a lot of it, and pretty much a lot of, pretty much the culture of many of these countries is not something that integrates well with the African American culture here in this country. So, and then you have to deal with the after effects of colonialism, et cetera, et cetera. But here's the thing. Here's what I want to say. The people from these countries have their own unique identity, their own unique relationships with, between themselves and the outside world. If you're of African descent in this country, I would not try to, like, how can I say, if people from those other countries and if they appear to be, or they, it's obvious to you that they obviously have African heritage. If they don't want to associate with you, or there's no type of camaraderie, I wouldn't try to force it. I would live and let live. Some people say that it's prejudice. I don't agree, or like racism, but I don't agree. It's just, humans have always been tribal. You know what I'm saying? There's always been tribalism. People have always, there's always been cliques, there's always been groups, there's always been, lines and boundaries, So whatever the history of these countries or these ethnicities or these individuals that you meet from other countries that come here, it's up to them to decide their own identity and who they are, et cetera, et cetera. You know what I'm saying? That's up for them to decide. Now, for those of them who are open-minded and are willing, are into that type of history, you can have those conversations with them, and they'll, openly tell them, like, especially like in Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, and Cuba, a small percentage of those of people of those countries still practice African type religions, and even in Brazil and Venezuela and certain parts. So there are a small number of people who have recognized their African heritage and have maintained some type of continuation of those traditions or religions, et cetera, and still live, and practice certain things, So it is what it is. But for the most part, for the mainstream person, of the mainstream thought of those countries is usually the identity of, whatever it is that colony that set up shop in that particular territory gave to them, whether it's the Spanish or the Portuguese or the Dutch or the French, you know what I'm saying, and they carry that. So what I would say is, just live and let live. But at the same time, things are changing in this country. Our cost of living is growing because we live on a fiat currency. For those of you who don't know what that is, a fiat currency is a money that is not backed by any type of, no gold or silver or anything like that. It's just money that's printed. The more you print, the more it devalues, the higher the cost of living. So the thing is this: at the same time, each person from each country, each national heritage has their own culture, their own way. But at the same time, if you can build bridges with like-minded people, you know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, whether you're an African American or you're a Caribbean or a South American, we all pretty much have the same type of story, like the same type of, if you go back the past 400 years, we have the same answer, the same story. Pretty much many of us are either descended from Native Americans or Africans who were under European colonial rule, and over time we amalgamated into the mainstream culture, et cetera, et cetera. So we all, if we were to get a DNA, if you were to get a DNA test of most of the people in the United States who who consider some African American, with a lot of the people from South America and the Caribbean islands, the percentages would be roughly the same. Now, Central America is a little bit different. Central American has a strong Native Amerindian base, and when you take the so-called Amerindian or the Native American and you mix it with the European, that's when you get the term mestizo or mestiza if it's a female. Central Americans are more mestizo. It depends on what country. It depends on what country. But if you're talking about like Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, those people are more mestizo. Now you're talking about Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, Colombia. It's both. You know what I'm saying? You have mulattoes, which are Africans and Europeans mixed, and then you have a lot of the mestizos. So, that's how it is. And then Peru is more mestizo, that kind of stuff. Now, you should also be careful with these terms because depending on what country, what country you are, sometimes that might be considered offensive in certain countries. In most countries, based on my knowledge, it's not. But there are a few where I believe that is considered like a derogatory term. So be careful how you just refer to them as their nationality, whether they're Mexican, whether they're El Salvador, Dominican, whatever, to just make something simple, unless you're familiar with that culture and those people. Da 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 da. But what was I gonna say? So anyways, as I was saying, yes, anyways, times are changing. So if you're able to build bridges with, because we're all relatives, we all have a similar story, whether they want to accept that or not. If they identify with being Spanish or Portuguese, whatever, that's their prerogative. But in their blood, in all our blood, we are all children of the soil of the Americas. Now, if we can have some type of reciprocity and collaborate for the times that's going to come up, you know what I'm saying? And you're able to collaborate with the people of your community who, may be of a different culture, et cetera, et cetera. You should do so, you know what I'm saying? And if you get into the history of the transatlantic slave trade in the colonies, and you get well read, and maybe you can speak another language, that could be a tool you can use to build bridges and strengthen your network. In the upcoming years, your network is going to be very important because a lot of things are going to change, especially with our economy and the AI, et cetera, et cetera. But in the past, like 80s, 90s, there was a lot of division between these communities of people of African descent in this country and people of African descent from other countries. They didn't always get along, and et cetera, et cetera. But now it's 2025. So if there are those lingering sentiments in the area in which you live, you know what I'm saying, I suggest you educate yourselves on who's on the demographics of who's living in your areas, and use that knowledge to try to build bridges. You know what I'm saying? Learn about the history of the people that live around you. Learn a little bit about their language, how they think, their ideology, their culture, how they, their religion. Learn about them so that you can better communicate and build rapport with them and knock down the walls that exist between humans of today. Because at the end of the day, we're all humans under the sun on this planet. And we're going to have to need to work together and put petty differences aside in order to get through the hard and difficult times that are upcoming in the future, in the very near future. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, we are more similar than dissimilar. So, that's really all I would say about that. Now, some interesting facts about that. What can I say about that? Well, the history of the transatlantic slave trade is very steep and vast. There's so much to cover about that. I leave it up to you all to do the research. But I will say this: Christopher Columbus was not a hero. He was a pedophile. He was a rapist and a pirate. why we have a holiday, why we have a holiday, giving this man any kind of credit or homage. That I don't know. He did not discover the Americas because there were already people here, in the Americas with, a society here, and their own language, their own civilization. Pyramids were here. You can look at the Olmec civilization, which is pretty much like the it's considered like the mother. It's pretty much the Olmec civilization is probably, it was the oldest. How can I say? It's like the mother of the past 2,000 years of the indigenous civilizations. You know what I'm saying? They had their own language, their own hieroglyphics. They had their own pyramids. Da 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 da. You have the Mayans. You have the Washita or Wichita. You had a lot of groups, but if you want to learn about the types of peoples who are here in the Americas, you know what I'm saying, before colonization and what they might have looked like and what they may have believed, I would study the Olmecs. The Olmecs is a good idea of what was going on in this continent before European arrival, and contrary to whatever story they spin or say what was here in the Americas. If you look into the Olmec civilization, that will give you a good idea. And look at the statues of those people, look at their features, and you tell me. And then, another culture you may want to look into are the Caribs, the Arawaks, the Tainos. Also we all know about the Incas. You know what I'm saying? We know about the Mayans, but the Arawaks, the Tainos, and the Caribs, that is another culture and civilization you should read into to learn about what was going on in this Western Hemisphere before European arrival. The Washita or the Wichita, more in the North America region, they're said to be related to the Olmecs. You have the Algonquins here in the northeast of the northern continent. The Algonquins, the Saskatchewan peoples. These are the cultures you need to learn into, and what do they look like? What do they believe in? How do they speak? That kind of stuff. If you look into this and also you do your own DNA, you find that, I'll say this, not everybody who appears to be what you refer to as a black person came from Africa. If you look into what everything that I just said, like the Tainos, the Arawaks, the Caribs, the Olmecs, the Algonquins, the Saskatchewans, all that, you'll see that, there was pretty much a mix of, there's different types of, it's just like a parallel to Africa. You go to Western North Africa, you're gonna see a variety of peoples. Pretty much that, it's like a mirror. So it's like a mirror. So there was different phenotypes of people here in the Americas. The the original peoples of this land were of two types. One, what you would call more like Oriental looking, like Asian, and the other was more Negro or Negroid. So Mongoloid or Negroid. You know what I'm saying? That's just to determine the phenotype. That it's a bit outdated, but that's the best way to describe it. You know what I'm saying? Asian looking peoples and African looking peoples. Those are the two groups of people who were here pre-Columbus. You know what I'm saying? That was their phenotype. So that's something you should look into. And well, I'll say what I was gonna say is about the presence of darker skinned people in Europe. But I'm gonna talk about that in another video. Anyways, that's all I really have to say about this topic. I'll leave some links in the description for you to do some research and do some reading about this.